Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked. The choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The wizarding world operates under a fundamental delusion in this timeline, that the boy who lived is merely delayed, temporarily misplaced in the Muggle suburbs, but inevitably inbound to Hogwarts. They are wrong. We open in the Great Hall, September 1st, 1991. Candles float in obedient formation. The ceiling mirrors a clear, indifferent sky, and the 4 house tables vibrate with first-year speculation. The name Harry Potter moves through the whispers like a spell of its own, a legend rehearsed by children who were still in nappies when Voldemort fell. At the staff table, Dumbledore waits with that cultivated, twinkling patience. McGonagall's list trembles only slightly in her hand. Potter, Harry, the sound knifes through the murmur. Benches creak as hundreds of bodies lean forward, angling for a first glimpse of history made flesh. The silence that follows is not immediate. It builds, second by second, as no one stands. No scrawny boy with broken glasses, no lightning scar catching the candlelight, just an empty space where the narrative insists a protagonist should be. The sorting hat, an artifact older than the ministry itself, waits on its stool, gaping mouth poised over nothing at all. This is the world's first lesson in absence. They ignore it. In their minds, Harry Potter is already enrolled, already chosen, already halfway to Gryffindor Tower. The entire post-war order has been constructed on that assumption, that the boy will return, be trained, and eventually be steered, gently or otherwise, toward the next war. In their quiet, bureaucratic confidence, the adults of this world have mistaken prophecy for methodical certainty, and a traumatized child for a cooperative asset. Cut to Privet Drive. Number 4 is a low, beige fortress of denial. Its hedges trimmed with military precision, its curtains drawn against anything resembling magic. The letters begin as in canon: owls at dawn, heavy parchment, emerald ink. But in this timeline, Harry has already learned that anything different is dangerous, that any deviation from the Dursley script is met with locked cupboards and weaponized silence. He reads the impossible words, School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and feels not wonder, but risk assessment. When Hagrid breaks down the door, the giant's entrance is not a fairy tale intrusion, but a breach. Vernon blusters, Petunia shrinks, and Harry listens. He hears about wands, houses, a hidden war. He hears that his name is famous in a world he never asked to inhabit. Then, with a flatness that should chill any seer, he says it. No, I'm not going. Not confusion. Not panic. A refusal delivered with the calm of someone who has survived by never attracting the wrong kind of attention. In that moment, Harry ceases to be a passive victim of neglect and becomes the architect of his own disappearance. The divergence radiates outward, quietly tactically lethal. The trace never triggers on Privet Drive. There is no illicit hover charm, no accidental explosion to flag his presence. In the Department of Mysteries, a dust-filmed orb bearing his name sits untouched, its soul resonance unclaimed, a prophecy waiting for a hand that will not come. Across the continent, Death Eaters whisper in drawing rooms and Azkaban cells that the boy who lived is either a ministry fabrication or a coward hiding among Muggles. Everything begins to destabilize around a missing center. Hogwarts runs its feasts. Quirrell mutters his prayers. The Weasleys budget for second-hand robes. Yet the story's gravitational anchor is absent. If the chosen hero refuses the call, does the dark simply rise unchallenged? Or does the entire game board crack for both sides when the narrative loses its protagonist? Today, we deconstruct a world built on that refusal, a world where destiny knocks and the door never opens. Halloween, 1980, 1. Rewritten, a prophecy without a participant. Halloween, 1981, is usually narrated as inevitability. A straight line of green light, a mother's scream, a Dark Lord's fall, and a baby crowned by accident. In this timeline, the events are identical. It is the interpretation that mutates like a curse, miscast by a trembling hand. Godric's Hollow still burns. Voldemort still ascends the stairs with methodical certainty, confident that prophecy and terror have already done the intellectual labor for him. Lily still places herself between wand and crib, and the killing curse still rebounds with tactically lethal precision, tearing his body apart and leaving the cottage in ruin. On the ground, nothing has changed. In the abstract machinery of fate, everything has. Because Dumbledore arrives not to a clear omen, but to an equation he thinks he understands. He reads the scorched walls and the living child as confirmation that Harry Potter will eventually answer destiny's call, that the boy's survival encodes a future willingness to engage the war. They are wrong. The Wizarding World, the Death Eaters, even the Order, all quietly assume that a baby who did not consent to live for them will one day volunteer to die for them. The deeper magic at work that night does not agree. Lily's sacrifice does not function as a summons. It functions as a shield keyed to agency. The protection that binds to Harry is not a script, but a clause. He may step into the prophecy, or he may refuse it, and the power will honor that refusal. In this timeline, soul resonance is not an invisible leash dragging him toward Voldemort. It is a warded door that only opens from the inside. Dumbledore cannot see that. With the weary authority of a man who believes he has already played this game once, he places Harry on a Privet Drive doorstep and calls it mercy. Blood wards, he tells himself, will fuse Lily's love and Petunia's grudging kinship into a suburban fortress. The slow reveal at 11, the letters, the half-giant messenger, the tour of a hidden world, will, in his mind, produce curiosity, gratitude, pliability. Harry will be a masterpiece to be molded at Hogwarts, not a variable to be respected in the Muggle world. That assumption is the first great miscalculation. The motif of this Slytherin timeline is born here. The silent variable. The prophecy exists, humming in the background like a warded vault. But one of its subjects will simply elect not to participate. Fate, accustomed to willing champions and eager martyrs, will be forced to contort around a missing piece, redesigning its war plans around an absence. Deep beneath London, the Department of Mysteries sleeps. Shelves of glass orbs line the darkness, each one a compressed future. One sphere, labelled with a date, 2 names, and eventually a boy's, vibrates faintly as Voldemort falls in Godric's Hollow, as if expecting someone to reach for it. No hand comes. The orb stills. Magic, in this timeline, is not triumphant. It is holding its breath. The day Harry says no. Letters, Hagrid, and a calculated refusal. Privet Drive becomes the stage for a quieter apocalypse, not of dark marks and screaming, but of paper, ink, and mounting psychological pressure. The first letter arrives as in canon. Cream parchment, emerald ink, the unnerving precision of his cupboard listed as an address. Vernon confiscates it, burns it, congratulates himself on maintaining the normal fortress. They are wrong. By the 3rd day, the owls have become a weather pattern, a new climate system circling number 4 with methodical certainty. Each failed delivery answered by 10 more, then 50, then a blizzard. In this timeline, the sequence that fans remember as whimsical escalation plays as horror comedy turned siege warfare. Envelopes detonate from the fireplace like shrapnel. They burst from eggs at breakfast, slick with yolk and inevitability. They slide under doors, through keyholes, down the chimney, turning the Dursley home into a paper-choked trench. Dudley howls, Petunia shakes. Vernon boards up letterboxes and rants about them. And Harry, supposedly the target of all this attention, does not laugh or reach for a single envelope. He retreats. Years of being locked in the cupboard for unnatural accidents have trained him with brutal efficiency. The lesson has been simple. Attention equals pain. When a teacher once praised his drawing, Dudley's gang broke his pencils. When his hair grew back overnight after a bad haircut, he lost meals for a week. Magic, whatever it is not an invitation to wonder. It is a liability that gives the Dursleys new vocabulary for the word freak and gives the wider world, in his imagination, new mechanisms of authority to crush him. Survival has become an art of negative space. He lives by erasing himself. So when the letters escalate, Harry's logic is cold and almost tactically lethal. If they want him this badly, it cannot be safe. Important people are visible people. Visible people bleed. Hagrid's arrival should break this pattern. It does not. He storms the hut on the rock with all his canonical fury, pink umbrella raised like a banner, outraged at the Dursleys, at ignorance, at the world that left this boy in a cupboard. He speaks of Hogwarts, of houses, of wands and feasts. He speaks of Harry's name as if it were a spell that could light the dark. And then he says, the fatal words, famous boy who lived, whole world knows your name. Harry goes very still. The questions land like precision curses. If I'm so important, Why did no one come sooner? Why did you leave me there? Why now, when I'm finally old enough to survive on my own? Hagrid, built for loyalty, not interrogation, flounders. He offers Dumbledore's wisdom, the war, the prophecy he only half understands. It sounds to Harry like yet another adult explaining why his suffering was necessary for a masterpiece to be molded elsewhere. He makes a choice. He refuses the vault. He refuses the wand. He refuses Hogwarts when Hagrid, desperate, leaves one last acceptance letter on the rough table. Harry waits until the man's boots have vanished into the night, and then, with hands that do not shake, touches the corner to the gas flame. The parchment blackens, curls, becomes ash, a symbol of destiny collapsing into ordinary carbon. The trace never lands. No quill in the Ministry twitches. By dawn, Privet Drive is eerily calm. No owls, no letters, no magic. Just a boy who has decided to disappear from the story, and a giant walking back to Dumbledore, clutching a broken pink umbrella, and a refusal that will echo through the war to come. Because the prophecy has not ended. It has merely lost its protagonist. System error when Hogwarts' Book of Admittance is ignored. Hogwarts is not a letter. It is an apparatus. Hidden in a dust-heavy tower, the Book of Admittance and the Quill of Acceptance operate with almost mechanical faith in destiny. The quill scratches only when raw magical potential flares into being. The book seals the name in ink that never fades. Harry James Potter appears there in bold, dark strokes on the last day of July 1980, an entry the staff will later treat as a methodical certainty, as inevitable as sunrise over the castle. In this timeline, sunrise comes. The boy does not. September 1st, 1991. The express departs in a cloud of steam and childish awe. Prefects count heads. McGonagall cross-checks lists. One absence is an administrative impossibility, a ghost in the ledger. The boy who lived is a no-show. The first conversation is not grand or prophetic. It is bureaucratic. McGonagall stands in Dumbledore's office, jaw set, tartan robes rigid as armor, the Book of Admittance hovering between them like a legal exhibit. Her voice is clipped, controlled, the cadence of a woman who has spent decades turning chaos into timetable entries. The name is there, she insists. The magic is there. The Guardians are negligent at best. Hogwarts has authority. They must intervene. Dumbledore does not immediately disagree, but he moves, as ever, on a different axis. He speaks of Muggle autonomy, of the fragile trust that underpins the statute of secrecy, of the psychological violence of dragging a traumatized child into a world he associates only with graves and green light. Force him, Albus warns, and you do not get a student. You get a weapon being polished in the dark. The tragedy is that he is right about the danger. They are wrong about the timeline. While Hogwarts debates pastoral care, the Ministry reacts with the cold grammar of bureaucracy. Internal memos, thick with euphemism, begin to circulate in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the improper use of magic office. Subject: Potter, HJ. Classified as untrained magical asset. Flagged as a potential security risk and public symbol whose uncontrollable emergence could destabilize an already fragile post-war order. Yet even in the Slytherin timeline, law is its own fortress. Guardianship remains with the Dursleys. The Statute of Secrecy forbids over-coercion of Muggles who have committed no crime. Wizengamot precedent is clear that magical birth does not nullify Muggle rights. Unless Harry breaks the law, the Ministry cannot simply extract him. They can watch, they can wait, they cannot act. Here, the Trace becomes an accomplice to his disappearance. The decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery empowers the Ministry to monitor underage magic, not the bodies that might one day wield it. No spell, no charm, no accidental burst of power, no trace. Harry's magic, coiled and dormant, renders him effectively invisible to every system designed to supervise his growth. Pattern interrupt. In a world obsessed with bloodlines and prophecies, the most dangerous variable is administrative silence. Dumbledore's final choice is made in that silence. He orders no abduction, signs no extraordinary writ, dispatches no legerdemaincy-laced emissary. He will wait, he decides, trusting that soul resonance and necessity will pull Harry across the threshold when the world is finally unbearable without power. At the Ministry, the last memo is stamped and filed. Potter, HJ. Status: Monitor. Low priority. It is a misclassification that will behave like a slow-working curse, ripening in the dark, waiting for the day the boy they fail to train walks back into their war on his own terms. Growing up normal. Harry Potter, reluctant Muggle. On paper, the file is closed. In practice, the boy inside it begins constructing a different kind of fortress. By 13, Harry Potter's world is not castle corridors and moving staircases, but the scuffed linoleum and fluorescent hum of a comprehensive school on the edge of nowhere. In this timeline, the Sorting Hat never touches his head. Instead, a bored careers advisor does, asking about future goals, while Harry calculates the safest replies. Quidditch is replaced by part-time shifts, stacking tins in a supermarket, counting tills, learning that the people who wield real authority here are managers with clipboards and tempers that crack like spells. The cupboard under the stairs becomes history, not myth. Petunia, with a methodical certainty born of fear, clears it out the year the letters stop, as if erasing an incriminating shrine. Harry is moved to Dudley's second bedroom, but the upgrade is conditional. The more normal he appears, the less the Dursleys have to remember the word wizard. Slowly, the space evolves into a small, fiercely guarded sanctuary. Second-hand paperbacks, stacked in unstable towers, headphones coiled like wards around an ancient CD player. The window, a portal for late-night walks that trace the same streets until they feel ritualistic. It is not Hogwarts. It is control. The Dursleys adapt with reptilian efficiency. Their terror of magic sublimates into a terror of disruption. Vernon stops shouting about abnormality and starts talking about keeping your head down. Petunia watches him with the clinical vigilance of someone studying a volatile potion. As long as Harry remains quiet, punctual, unremarkable, the fragile peace holds. The moment he slips, an odd look, an unfinished chore, a report card that hints at brilliance, they flinch, as if the owl post might resume at any second and rip their carefully curated life back open. Under this pressure, Harry's psyche bends, but does not break. He becomes hyper-vigilant, reading moods the way a trained auror reads a battlefield. The slam of a door, the rustle of a newspaper, the angle of a teacher's jaw. Each is data, processed with tactically lethal speed to avoid conflict before it detonates. Group projects at school become exercises in quiet manipulation. Seating charts a map of alliances and threats. Crowded buses, a daily lesson in shrinking his presence, until he is nearly invisible. They are wrong to think he is powerless. He is simply untrained. And still, the magic leaks. A bully's fist swings toward his face one grey lunchtime and, for an instant, hangs in the air as if pushed back by an invisible shield. Everyone blinks, laughs nervously, decides he must have slipped. In a maths lesson, the overhead lights stutter and flare when a teacher's casual cruelty hits too close, bathing the room in a pulse that feels like soul resonance before settling into embarrassed silence. One evening during a low, venomous argument with Vernon about gratitude, a glass explodes in Harry's hand, shards blooming outward, water beading on the wallpaper like frozen rain. He stares at his uncut palm and decides, with the cold absolutism of someone who has already refused a world once, that it was a coincidence. Denial becomes its own discipline. Each incident is buried, rationalized, folded into the narrative of being just Harry. He builds a life that is safe, small, and meticulously controllable. School, work, his room, his walks. Emotionally, he armors himself in understatement, offering politeness where others would offer trust, silence where others would offer confession. In the Slytherin timeline, this would be the phase where a weapon is being polished in the dark, a masterpiece to be molded. Here, the same traits are misfiled as mere shyness. Yet, outside his narrow circuit of bus routes and payslips, a different war is still coalescing. Prophecies do not evaporate, they wait. While Harry perfects the art of not being noticed, power he refuses to touch continues to gather just out of sight, like a stormfront building beyond the sodium glow of streetlights, preparing the collision that will one day make normal impossible to sustain. The war without its poster boy, Hogwarts, Voldemort, and the empty space. Hogwarts waits for a boy who never walks through its gates. The war waits for a symbol who never arrives. History, in this timeline, keeps trying to reset to canon, only to find the space where Harry Potter should be is a widening absence, a structural fault in the narrative of salvation. The year 1991-1992 opens with an empty stool at the sorting ceremony. Whispers about the boy who lived circulate, but they are wrong. He is not dead, not imprisoned, merely clocking in at a supermarket in a different world. Inside the castle, the protections around the Philosopher's Stone are constructed as before, yet without a meddling trio, the entire architecture becomes an internal audit, not an adventure. Quirrell still drinks from Voldemort's parasite, still makes his move. This time, it is Dumbledore who must trace the anomalies in the corridors, who follows the trail to the Mirror of Erised and faces his former student's murderer alone. That confrontation is not a graceful victory. To deny Voldemort even a partial resurrection, Dumbledore is forced to destroy the stone outright, sacrificing Nicholas Flamel's quiet immortality and a century of alchemical research in one calculated act. He survives, but the duel leaves him visibly diminished, his authority hairline fractured. The staff see it. So do the Death Eaters still at large. By 1992-1993, the castle is already more fortress than school. The Chamber of Secrets opens on schedule. Ginny Weasley still writes in the diary, still unspools her fears into Tom Riddle's waiting ink. But there is no boy who lived to hear Parseltongue in a dueling club, no Muggle-born friend to spur reckless investigation. No spiders followed into the Forbidden Forest. The petrifications mount. Panic becomes policy. When Ginny disappears, the search is slower, more procedural, and by the time the entrance is finally breached, the rescue is an autopsy. The basilisk, unchallenged by a child with a phoenix and a sword, survives longer, forcing a brutal, coordinated hunt through the plumbing of Hogwarts that costs Aurore lives and leaves the school's reputation gutted. The diary has already done its work. Riddle's soul fragment feeds deeply, accelerating Voldemort's coherence, giving him a sharper soul resonance and a clearer map back to power. In 1993-1994, Sirius Black escapes Azkaban to protect a boy who refuses to be found. There is no Gryffindor dormitory to infiltrate, no fat lady's portrait to shred. Instead, he becomes a shadow on the periphery of Privet Drive, watching a nephew who flinches from owls and bins every letter. It is a tragic, one-sided guardianship, a godfather reduced to a stray dog on suburban pavements, howling softly at a world that will not realign. The Triwizard year, 1994 to 1995, reveals the full misalignment. The tournament proceeds without a fourth champion. There is no scandal, no enchanted goblet forcing destiny's hand. Voldemort, now more coherent thanks to the diary's earlier victory, cannot rely on theatrical resurrection via a schoolboy. He turns instead to quieter, darker arithmetic, a different sacrifice, a ritual built around captured Muggle-borns and the blood of an unwilling Death Eater, tactically lethal but less symbolic. He returns with less spectacle and more methodical certainty. Each year, the grooves of canon try to pull events back into alignment. Each year, the missing poster boy forces the war to become colder, more bureaucratic, more cruel. The legend of Harry Potter grows in the telling. The reality remains a weapon being polished in the dark, outside the script, waiting for the moment when both sides finally remember he exists. And when they do, the war will not be ready for the masterpiece to be molded that walks in from the Muggle world, with no house, no loyalties, and power he never learned to fear. Fractured lives. Ron, Hermione, Draco, and a Hogwarts without Harry. Hogwarts waits for Harry Potter. It reorganizes its expectations around an absence, and the children who should have orbited him are left to drift in eccentric, lonely orbits of their own. Ron Weasley arrives in 1991 not as the future right-hand of legend, but as Weasley child number 6, another freckled outline in a crowded family portrait. In this timeline, there is no empty seat on the train that becomes his destiny, no boy with a lightning scar to make his hand-me-downs irrelevant by sheer proximity to myth. Ron's old insecurities, poverty, hand-me-down wand, the shadow of Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred and George do not get reframed as endearing flaws redeemed by loyalty. They calcify. He laughs louder at Fred and George's pranks, tries to graft himself onto their chaos, or else trails after whichever Quidditch star or charismatic upper year will tolerate a satellite. Loyalty, without a focal point, becomes a liability. It curdles into resentment. Hermione Granger steps off the train with the same overstuffed trunk of books and the same ferocious need to be prepared for a world that is not prepared for her. But without Ron's blunt warmth and Harry's instinctive disregard for rules that hurt people, her brilliance has nowhere soft to land. At first, she aligns with authority with almost religious intensity. Every rule is a life raft. Every professor, a potential guarantor of safety in a world that could have left her in the Muggle dark forever. Detention is unthinkable. Demerits feel like existential threats. She becomes the student who reminds others about curfew with methodical certainty, who believes the system must be fair because the alternative is unbearable. Yet even a fortress of rules has cracks. Isolated evenings in the library, watching pureblood cliques maneuver with impunity, begin to erode her faith. Either she doubles down, becoming a prefect in waiting who polices her peers more harshly than any teacher, or she snaps early, turning into a one-girl crusade filing complaints, writing essays, and burning herself out against stone walls that do not move. Without soul resonance, with two boys who drag her out of her own head, her mission is either weaponized by the institution or broken by it. Draco Malfoy, meanwhile, is missing his mirror. There is no boy who lived in his year to sneer at, no public rejection on the train to crystallize his identity as anti-Potter. In this Slytherin timeline, he is not a theatrical bully rehearsing for an audience of one. He is a polished, pure-blood heir executing a curriculum of quiet, systemic cruelty. Blood status becomes a grading rubric, not a playground taunt. Without Harry's defiance forcing him into open conflict, Draco's malice is less noisy and more efficient, his charm more plausible, his redemption either easier to stage or harder to justify. The trio never forms. That is the structural catastrophe. Courage, intellect, and loyalty exist at Hogwarts, but they do not intersect. They run in parallel lines through separate houses and separate crises. Fires that would have been contained by 3 first years sneaking through corridors instead become staff problems, ministry problems. Late one evening, Hermione sits alone in the library, a single candle guttering beside a stack of histories. The boy who lived stares up at her from a moving photograph. Smiling infant, ruined house, a legend that conveniently ends at a doorstep. She closes the book with a precise, irritated snap. The narrative does not add up, and for the first time, she admits it. Somewhere outside the wards, a weapon being polished in the dark turns over in his sleep, and Hermione Granger begins to wonder who, exactly, the world has misplaced. Voldemort's second strategy, a Dark Lord without a nemesis. Hermione's suspicion forms in a vacuum, and vacuums are dangerous in this world. They invite new myths, while she traces vanished names and redacted reports. Voldemort is already adapting to a reality the Ministry refuses to name. There is no accessible boy who lived, no convenient narrative axis around which to spin his return. Destiny has gone missing. Power adjusts. The turning point is still ink and memory bound in a cheap black diary. In this timeline, Ginny Weasley does not stagger out of the chamber. She never wakes on the cold stone. The basilisk's venom and Tom Riddle's parasitic will drain her clean, and by the time the staff forces the entrance, the monster is a husk, and Riddle is not a shade but a body, pale, adolescent, breathing with a terrible, tactically lethal calm. They will call Ginny a tragic casualty of negligence. They are wrong. Her death becomes a martyrdom Voldemort never enjoyed in canon. Riddle walks out of Hogwarts under our escort as evidence, but within weeks he vanishes from a Ministry holding cell that was never designed to contain a Horcrux-bearing adolescent Dark Lord. In the silence that follows, a story begins to circulate in whispers. The Old Order cannot even protect its children in its safest fortress. Ginny's grave is not just a wound, it is a banner, freed from the theatrical constraint of a prophesied duel. Voldemort's second strategy is colder. The diary's success confirms that soul fragments can be used not only to anchor, but to assemble. He raids forgotten vaults and war-era archives, harvesting cursed regulators' seals, goblin-forged amulets, and relics from the first Grindelwald conflict. The resurrection ritual, when it finally occurs, is not anchored in the rarefied blood of a single nemesis, but in the blood of many. A Muggle-born healer, taken from St. Mungo's, a squib clerk from the Department of Mysteries, a pure-blood heir abducted from a gala, each killed in a pattern that maps old hierarchies and then erases them. Their blood, mixed with basilisk venom and powdered Horcrux shards, produces a body that is not symbolically tethered to a prophecy, but to raw, aggregated power. Soul resonance is no longer a binary link between Dark Lord and child. It is a network, a lattice of stolen lineages and sacrificed futures. In this ritual circle, Harry Potter is conspicuous only by his absence. The magic does not care. It answers anyway. Without the boy who lived as counterweight, Voldemort stops presenting himself as Destiny's rival, and instead as the only rational actor in a paralyzed bureaucracy. He speaks through clandestine broadcasts and enchanted pamphlets, of a ministry that monitors underage magic, yet loses entire children, of Hogwarts that hides monsters in its walls, of a world where prophecies gather dust while Muggle wars redraw borders. He does not promise glory, he promises order. Death Eater culture shifts to match. The old fanatics, those who once dreamed of a blazing courtyard duel and a screaming child, feel a private disappointment that their master's legend will not be crowned by a single operatic victory. Others are relieved. Without a personal vendetta to indulge, Voldemort becomes administratively terrifying. He assigns infiltration cells to Gringotts, to the International Confederation, to the Muggle Prime Minister's security detail, tracking them with a ledger-like precision that feels more corporate than cultic. What was once a crusade curdles into a campaign, measured, incremental, almost bureaucratic in its cruelty. The pattern interrupt comes quietly. One night, in an abandoned war bunker repurposed as a meeting hall, Voldemort stands before his assembled followers in a body grown from many deaths. No snake-faced theatrics, no grandiose retelling of a failed murder in Godric's Hollow. He does not speak Harry Potter's name. Instead, he raises a pale hand over a table strewn with maps and census rolls, and simply outlines timelines, pressure points, and projected casualty curves. The promise he offers is not apocalypse, but suffocation. Not a world ending in green light and legend, but one gradually choked by laws, disappearances, and quiet, enforced obedience. Destiny is replaced by methodical certainty. The world will not fall in a blaze. It will forget, slowly, that it was ever allowed to stand. The Ministry's dilemma: can you draft a reluctant chosen one? The Ministry discovers the problem late. It is not a Dark Lord or a dragon breach, but an absence, a British citizen with confirmed magical capacity who has, in this timeline, reached adulthood without ever entering their jurisdiction. Harry Potter exists in their ledgers as a childhood anomaly, and then nothing. No trace alerts, no accidental magic reports, no Hogwarts files. A silence so complete it becomes loud. Years after his first rejected letter, they convene a closed hearing 3 floors below the Department of Mysteries. Auras in worn dragonhide, unspeakables in featureless masks, and the inevitable ring of parchment-heavy bureaucrats assemble around a single question. Is an untrained adult Harry Potter more dangerous by a mission than he would be as a controlled asset of the state? The war has not yet reignited, but the scent of it is in the air. The unspeakables argue first, with the cold precision of those who chart soul resonance and probability curves for a living. In their models, Harry is not a boy, he is a strategic variable, a pressure point in the Slytherin timeline whose mere existence bends outcomes. An uneducated variable is unpredictable. An unpredictable variable, they insist, is tactically lethal. Their proposal is blunt: extract, contain, train. They are wrong, Dumbledore counters when he finally speaks. The Chief Warlock's voice is soft, but carries the weight of both worlds. Under the statute of secrecy, he reminds them, They cannot simply abduct a British citizen from his Muggle life without detonating precisely the crisis they claim to avert. Muggle guardianship laws, social services, and the press form a different kind of fortress around Harry. One built of cameras, court orders, and human rights language the Wizengamot barely understands. To seize him is to admit to the Muggle world that magic exists. Harry becomes a legal paradox, too important to ignore, too protected to touch. The room tightens around that contradiction. Some suggest manufacturing a pretext, staged accidental magic, obliviated witnesses, a quiet transfer of custody. But even the most ruthless functionaries hesitate at the administrative war this would unleash. One miscast memory charm in front of the wrong camera, and centuries of secrecy fracture. Then, the unspeakables introduce a deeper constraint. Prophecies, they explain, can be ignored but not erased. The orb bearing Harry's name still sits, inert but humming, in the Department of Mysteries. Its conditions remain live, its potentialities circling like vultures. By refusing to engage, Harry is not dissolving destiny, he is bottling it. Reality, they warn, seeks equilibrium. Pressure without release does not vanish, it explodes. Dumbledore seizes on that image. To force Harry now, he says, would be to mirror Voldemort's own coercive tactics, the reduction of a human being to a masterpiece to be moulded, a weapon being polished in the dark. If the war must come, let Harry enter it by choice or not at all. In the end, the Ministry chooses the illusion of restraint. They vote, narrowly, to watch rather than act. A surveillance protocol is drafted. Plainclothes wizards rotating through Harry's neighborhood. Discreet wards threaded into street lamps and bus stops. Quiet reports filed on his movements, his friendships, his ambitions. They tell themselves this is prudence, not cowardice. That methodical certainty can be achieved from a distance. It is their final miscalculation, because as the Ministry settles into its patient observation, another power is also watching the blind spot they have so carefully defined, and has no intention of honouring its boundaries. Harry at 25, power buried alive in a cubicle. The Ministry's quiet surveillance ages into habit, then into complacency. Harry Potter, they conclude, has chosen obscurity over legend, and perhaps that is the safest outcome for all involved. They are wrong. At 25, Harry lives in a world of humming fluorescence and stale carpet glue, a narrow office corridor that might as well be a Ministry sub-department, stripped of magic and ambition alike. He is an assistant operations analyst in a mid-level logistics firm, the human equivalent of a stable spreadsheet. Accurate, punctual, and instantly forgettable. His desk is a beige peninsula in an open-plan sea, his nameplate slightly crooked, his tie always one shade too dull to be memorable. In this timeline, the boy who lived has become the man who blends. Childhood survival skills, once deployed against Dursley tempers and locked cupboards, have been repurposed with methodical certainty. He reads his manager's mood from the angle of a coffee mug, senses brewing conflict in the way two colleagues stop emailing and start walking to each other's desks. and is always, always the one who offers to take this offline and quietly fix it. In meetings, he speaks just enough to be useful and never enough to be leading. Conversations flow around him, but decisions bend subtly in his direction. He is the invisible backbone of minor systems, never the face of anything, a weapon being polished in the dark, without anyone realizing a weapon is what he is. The toll of refusal, however, is written into the fine print of his body. Chronic headaches settle behind his eyes like a permanent low-pressure front. Sleep comes in brittle fragments. He drifts through nights in which he is neither fully dreaming nor fully awake, as if his soul resonance is half a step out of phase with the world. Some mornings, the mirror in his cramped rented flat returns his reflection with a fractional delay, as though it must search for him. On bad days, when deadlines converge and the office air grows thick with unspoken panic, the computers in his row freeze simultaneously, cursors locked mid-blink, and only restart once he has forced his breathing back under control. He tells himself it is coincidence. He has to, because the alternative, that the doors that slam and lock behind him when he needs 10 seconds alone in the stairwell, that the near-miss car accident where the skidding vehicle somehow folds around him without impact, that the coffee mug which explodes in his hand at the precise moment he thinks with absolute clarity, "I can't do this anymore," are manifestations of a power he has spent 14 years denying, would unravel the careful fortress of normalcy he has built. The trace never truly learned his signature. The wizarding world's silence has been bought by his own refusal to answer its call. Admitting that magic is leaking through the cracks now would mean admitting that the Slytherin timeline's central illusion, that inaction is neutrality, was always a lie. So he files each anomaly under stress, fatigue, bad wiring. He schedules an eye test. He buys a surge protector. He does not, under any circumstances, say the word. One winter night, leaving the office long after dark, he steps into a city that glows sodium orange and rain slick, headphones muting the world to a distant, rhythmic thrum. The pavement is crowded with late commuters and early drinkers, umbrellas colliding, breath fogging in the cold. Harry walks as he always does, shoulders slightly hunched, gaze down, presence minimized, which is why it takes him a full second to register the figure moving against the current. A tall shape in a cloak far too heavy and archaic for London, gliding through the crowd without a single jostle, unseen by anyone whose shoulder it passes within inches. People's paths bend around it with unconscious deference, like filings around an invisible magnet. As Harry nears, the air temperature drops a fraction. The street lights above them flicker, then steady. The figure's hood tilts infinitesimally toward him as they pass, as if tasting the air around his skin. Harry does not look up. He tells himself, he imagined it, that the chill is just the wind off the river, that the faint scent of ozone is from a passing tramline. Behind him, the crowd closes, the cloak swallowed by ordinary coats and ordinary lives. For 3 steps, his heart hammers so hard, his vision narrows. On the 4th, The office playlist in his ears switches tracks without input, the song skipping ahead as though some unseen hand has brushed the controls. Somewhere behind him, in the reflection of a darkened shop window, his image lags half a second, watching a cloaked silhouette pause, turn, and finally, deliberately, follow. Two worlds have just brushed past each other on a wet London pavement. Next, they will stop pretending not to see. The first collision, a Death Eater attack on a Muggle street. The first time the war stops pretending, it does not arrive with owls or prophecies. It arrives with wet concrete, late buses, and the smell of burned coffee. It is a Tuesday evening, the kind of grey that makes London feel subterranean. Rain needles down in fine, relentless lines, turning the pavement into a smear of neon reflections. Pharmacy green, kebab shop red, the electric blue of a betting shop sign stuttering in the wind. Buses hiss at the curb, brakes exhaling. Car headlights drag pale corridors of light through puddles. Harry shoulders through it, with everyone else, headphones in, mind on the banal arithmetic of survival. Rent due Friday, a client threatening to pull a contract, whether he can stretch instant noodles and tea into another week. The air goes wrong between one breath and the next. It is not the natural chill of rain. It is a density, a pressure, as if the whole street has been lowered a few meters underwater. Sound dulls. The hiss of traffic recedes into a muffled backdrop. For a heartbeat, the world seems to hold itself perfectly still, a manufactured silence he recognizes in his bones, without knowing the language for it. In this timeline, the trace has never flared around his name, but soul resonance does not care about ministry paperwork. Reality unhooks with a crack like thunder striking at ground level. Figures appear in the middle of the crossing, black-robed, masked, their arrival so violently out of joint with the wet, fluorescent mundanity that several pedestrians simply freeze, as though their brains refuse to render the image. Then, the first spell screams down the street. It is not light the way Muggles understand it. Sickly green, arterial red, ultraviolet shards that leave after images burned into retinas. Bolts of power tear through a parked car, glass erupting outward in a crystalline roar. A bus window implodes. People scream, phones jerk up and die, screens going black in their owners' hands as ambient magic shreds circuitry. The statute of secrecy in this moment is not merely bent, it is annihilated. Harry moves before he decides to. Instinct, not training. A body that has always known it was built for something other than spreadsheets. He tackles a woman in a yellow raincoat behind a concrete bin, just as a jet of violet fire shears across where her head had been, heat licking his neck. Tarmac buckles. Somewhere to his left, someone stops screaming mid-note. The killing curse finds him anyway. It arcs toward him in a slow, obscene parabola, green and absolute, and the world narrows to that color. There is no wand in his hand, no incantation on his tongue. There is only a lifetime of pressure, letters ignored, knocks refused, a destiny treated as junk mail, compressing into a single point. Something snaps. Power detonates outward from his chest. not channeled, but expelled, a shock wave that feels like a building exhaling. The green bolt bends, warping mid-flight, as if the air has become viscous. It skids away, carving a luminous scar along a brick facade. Death Eaters are hurled backward, robes snapping like torn flags, masks clanging against asphalt. Pavement fractures in a spiderweb radius around Harry. Streetlights flicker and burst, and every window for a block shatters in a cascading roar of glass. He is not tactically lethal. He is indiscriminate, a weapon being polished in the dark that has just fired itself. People live because of it. People bleed because of it. No Obliviator squad will be able to tidy this into a gas leak and a power outage. There are too many witnesses, too much footage, even if half of it is corrupted by magical interference. The Slytherin timeline has always dealt in controlled demonstrations of authority. This is not controlled. This is revelation by accident. When the echo finally dies, the rain seems hesitant to fall into the space he has cleared. Harry stands in the wreckage, lungs dragging in ragged freezing air, hands shaking. Shards of glass crunch under his boots. In the dim spill of emergency lighting, his eyes glow faintly, not theatrically, but with the low banked luminescence of power that has remembered itself. Dozens of faces stare back at him from behind overturned benches and twisted metal. They are not seeing a commuter. They are seeing the impossible. At the mouth of a side alley, half veiled by steam from a ruptured pipe, a robed figure lowers their wand with methodical certainty. They have watched every second. They do not disapparate. They step forward. The worlds have finally collided, and someone has come to claim the masterpiece, to be molded. Exposure. The wizarding world can't ignore Harry anymore. The illusion dies in under 3 minutes. Sirens converge on the wreckage with almost choreographed precision. But the first uniforms to breach the cordon are not paramedics. They are auras, in fluorescent jacket glamours, wands hidden in clipboards, and medical bags. The Muggle world thinks it is watching emergency protocol. In this timeline, it is watching a containment operation. They are wrong. Obliviators spill out of unmarked fans, fanning through the crowd with the smooth, exhausted efficiency of people who have rehearsed for exactly this war and prayed it would never arrive. Gas leak. The cover story snaps into place, as if language itself can overwrite the image of a young man standing in the epicenter of an impossible blast. Clothes singed, eyes clear, body untouched. Every memory they touch bends, blurs, yields, until it hits that constant. Harry. He is the fixed point in a sea of altered recollections, the name that keeps reappearing in panicked testimonies, the silhouette that will not dissolve even under practiced obliviation. The Ministry technicians feel it as a kind of soul resonance, an echo of ancient protections, and something wilder, untrained, pushing back against their edits. Files are opened on the hood of a police car. Quills scratch over parchment, while Muggle radios hiss static inches away. The two worlds occupy the same physical space for a heartbeat, and the boundary is held together by lies. Harry is removed quietly, not in chains, but in the polite, suffocating grip of authority that has decided he is now evidence. The makeshift safe house is a rented semi on the edge of town, transfigured on the inside into a sterile, white-walled fortress of interviews and diagnostic charms. They sit him at a kitchen table that no longer remembers it was ever used for dinner. And the questions begin. What spells did you use? Who trained you? Which side are you on? The answers land with dull, destabilizing honesty. He used nothing. He knows nothing. He chose no side because he has spent his entire life refusing to admit there was a battlefield. Beyond a half-remembered night, with a giant and a letter he never read, the wizarding world is a rumor he declined to believe. The Aurors, prepared to pass lies, find themselves interrogating a vacuum. Bureaucracy reacts the only way it knows how, with paper and panic. Names are cross-referenced, dusty files yanked from archives that still smell faintly of Dumbledore's lemon drops and quiet warnings. The prophecy, long quarantined in whispers, and the Department of Mysteries, is spoken aloud in cramped briefing rooms by people who never expected to be in the same sentence as destiny. The boy they agreed not to drag through the barrier at 11 has re-emerged as a man whose power has never been standardized by curriculum, never domesticated by house points and detentions. Elsewhere, the news travels along a darker circuitry. A spy in an Auror's skin kneels in a forgotten cellar and reports, not that the prophecy has awakened, but that the boy who lived has performed magic in public with no wand, no incantation, and no apparent effort. Voldemort listens in absolute silence. It is not fate that interests him. It is leverage. Raw, unshaped power, Muggle-raised, emotionally unbonded to their world. A weapon being polished in the dark by neglect rather than design. In the Slytherin timeline, this is the moment every major faction pivots. The Ministry drafts protocols. The Order of the Phoenix dusts off contact plans and contingency letters. Death Eaters begin to argue in low, eager voices about capture versus annihilation. Harry sits alone in that transfigured kitchen, the hum of containment wards just beyond his hearing, and understands with belated clarity that his refusal was never going to be the final word. Vectors are converging. Saying no is no longer an exit. It is merely his opening move. Negotiating destiny, Harry, Dumbledore, and the terms of engagement, the opening move becomes visible 3 days later. In a building Harry has only ever associated with tax codes and fluorescent lighting. They do not summon him to a castle. They invite him to a conference room. On paper, it is a cross-departmental consultation inside a nondescript Muggle government annex near Whitehall, a space quietly flooded with layered wards that make the trace stutter and the air hum with restrained power. Frosted glass, grey carpet, a jug of water beading condensation, overlaid with runic anchors and ministry sigils that only half belong to this world. Neutral ground. In theory, a fortress in miniature. In practice. Across the table sit Albus Dumbledore, Minerva McGonagall, and a thin, fox-eyed liaison from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, who introduces herself as Madame Rowell. Harry notes the name, the posture, the way her wand hand never drifts far from her sleeve. He arrives alone, in a borrowed Muggle suit that does not quite fit, carrying nothing but a legal pad and a pen. The wizarding world assumes the boy who lived will be grateful when they finally reveal themselves in this timeline. They are wrong. The inversion is immediate and almost impolite. Dumbledore begins with the expected overture, regret about the Dursleys, solemn references to protection, a carefully vague nod to prophecy, and Harry cuts through the performance with a single flat clarification. You're not here to inform me. You're here to ask me for something. The silence that follows is not deference. It is recalibration, the realization that the child they abandoned has grown into a negotiator who understands leverage. Harry does not rant. He cross-examines. With methodical certainty, he walks them through his childhood, as if presenting a case file. The bruises never investigated, the letters never explained. The decision to place him with guardians who despised magic when wizarding law clearly allowed for alternatives. Each question is a scalpel. Who signed the placement orders? Who monitored his welfare? Who decided that his ignorance was an acceptable collateral cost for their war? McGonagall flinches first. Rowell hides behind procedure. Dumbledore, for once, has no parable ready. The greater good sounds thin under fluorescent lights. Only when the ethical ledger is laid bare does Harry move to terms. He does not agree to become a masterpiece to be moulded. He defines a contract. In exchange for structured training on his schedule, complete access to his own history and the relevant fragments of prophecy, and ironclad protections extended to the Muggles he names. Dursleys included, because even hostile witnesses are leverage. He will engage with the wizarding world on a limited basis. Consultations, not conscription. Missions, not ownership. He specifies non-negotiables, no unbreakable vows, no memory tampering, no oaths of unconditional obedience, and a standing right to walk away if they cross lines he will enumerate in writing. He wants independent verification of any threat they cite, including Voldemort. He wants ministry guarantees that he will not be detained for his own safety. In a universe built on unspoken obligations and soul-resonant prophecies, he demands paperwork. Dumbledore realizes, with a quiet grief edged by reluctant admiration, that the boy he once imagined as a weapon being polished in the dark has instead become a free agent, tactically lethal, structurally unowned. This is not the Slytherin timeline, yet the resonance is there. A Harry who will stand on the board only on his own terms. He signs nothing that day. He leaves them with a draft pact and a final warning. If they move against him or his Muggle life without consent, he will treat them as just another hostile faction in a hidden war. The door closes behind him. Wards tremble. Somewhere far from Whitehall, a different set of eyes feels the shift and begins to adjust their own plans. Because if Harry Potter will not be recruited, he will have to be cornered. And someone, watching from the dark, is already deciding where to build the cage. Crash course in power, training a late blooming prodigy. The cage is not a dungeon. It is a timetable. Within days of that Whitehall confrontation, Harry is moved, quietly, contractually, into a secure, warded facility buried beneath an anonymous research campus on the edge of London. On paper, it is a cross-cultural integration centre funded by obscure grants. In reality, it is part library, part dojo, part hospital, a clinical fortress built to compress 11 lost school years into a handful of weaponized months. In this timeline, the boy who lived does not stroll into Hogwarts to be sorted. He is triaged. Every hour is rationed between what he must learn to survive and what there is simply no time for. Charms electives vanish. Quidditch is a rumour. Ancient runes is reduced to a single brutal question. Will this make him tactically lethal in the shortest possible window? If not, it dies on the schedule. The first priority is containment. Wandwork and defensive magic come before elegance, before theory, before any pretense of well-rounded education. His surges, those uncontrolled flares that once shattered light bulbs and twisted office electronics, are now dragged into the open and hammered into shields, deflection patterns, and non-lethal stunners. The instructors, rotating between ministry-approved duelists and grim-faced healers, speak with the flat urgency of crash investigators trying to teach a pilot mid-fall how to land. Then the mind. Occlumency, once a jealously guarded art, becomes mandatory medicine. Harry's unshielded thoughts are a liability in a world of legilimency and prophecy. They cannot afford a single uncontrolled memory of this facility reaching the wrong eyes. Here, his much-amiled emotional restraint becomes an asset. Years of office politics, of swallowing anger in meetings and negotiating with indifferent managers, are reinterpreted as the skeletal frame of a fortress he can now reinforce. He learns to visualize doors, corridors, kill zones in his own head, to build mental walls with methodical certainty. The pattern interrupt arrives not in a duel, but in a lecture. A theorist places a diagram in front of him, fields, vectors, resonance curves, and explains that the accidents of his childhood were not freak anomalies, but consistent expressions of power, without schema. For the first time, Harry sees his life as an equation rather than a curse. Magic is reframed as an instrument, not a leak, but a violin that has been screeching without tuning. Under guidance, his observational skills, honed across years of reading rooms and clients, become the foundation for tactical spellcasting. He notices wand angles, stance shifts, micro-expressions, and translates them into preemptive counters. They called him passive. They are wrong. Once he commits, the years of feeling powerless ignite into a brutal work ethic. He drills until his hands shake, then drills wandless focus exercises when they will no longer close. Nightmares intensify as magic reopens old wounds. The cupboard, the shouted arguments, the cold administrative language of placement and liability, now overlaid with hexfire and green light, he has never consciously seen. Sleep becomes another battleground. Identity fractures under the strain. By day, he is dissected as a masterpiece, to be molded, every reaction logged, every spell timed, every failure fed back into the curriculum. By night, he stares at fluorescent tiles and wonders when exactly an underpaid office worker became a living weapon on retainer for a world that has done nothing to earn his loyalty. The Slytherin timeline never needed Bellatrix to forge a weapon being polished in the dark. Bureaucratic necessity is doing the same work with cleaner floors and better lighting. Slowly, a pivot. As his occlumency walls thicken, as his spells snap into place with cold precision, fear gives way to insistence. If his life will be wagered, it will be on his terms. Magic ceases to be an invasive presence and becomes a tool he grips with white-knuckled authority. The facility thinks it is building a shield. What walks out may decide to be something else entirely. A Hogwarts that isn't home, returning as an outsider. So when Harry finally approaches Hogwarts, it is not as a child arriving at myth, but as a controlled variable entering a hostile experiment. The wizarding world has spent years telling itself that the boy who lived will one day stride through those doors, wide-eyed and grateful. They are wrong. It is evening when he comes, not by scarlet steam train, but in a narrow boat cutting across the Black Lake, chartered through a terse ministry accord. No sorting hat waits, no prefect speeches, no floating candles unveiling a new life. Just the low growl of the castle's wards reacting to an unregistered adult wizard crossing the boundary, and Harry in plain Muggle clothes, standing against the wind as the silhouette of the fortress rises like a verdict. He studies it the way he once studied MRI schematics and spell suppression grids. Beautiful, yes, but also structurally suspect. Inside, the resonance is more dangerous. For a heartbeat, as the first towers loom into view, there is a flicker. An 11-year-old who once pressed his palms against cheap glass and imagined any elsewhere as salvation. That boy had drawn Hogwarts in the margins of school notebooks he later burned. The memory hits with an almost physical soul resonance, a ghost of a life never lived. The surface shows none of it. His features are marble still, the facility's occlumency drills, etched into every micro-expression. He moves with methodical certainty, conserving motion, offering no tells. Students lining the battlements and crowding the entrance hall register only the outline, a young man with a famous scar, no robes, no house colours, no visible allegiance, an absence wearing a human shape. Whispers spread faster than any owl. In this timeline, children who grew up on bedtime stories of the vanished savior now crane their necks to glimpse the reality and find no waving, no awkward smile, no boy asking where the Great Hall is. Older Slytherins weigh him like a new weapon being polished in the dark. Some Gryffindors bristle at the lack of performative bravery, as if his refusal to play hero is a personal insult. A cluster of Hufflepuffs watch him with wary compassion. Ravenclaws catalogue anomalies. No trunk, no familiar, no first-year timetable. Yet the wards themselves parted. Hogwarts, in turn, is reframed. For Harry, it is not homecoming. It is infrastructure, a vertically integrated nexus of libraries, laboratories, and latent war potential stitched together by centuries of complacent tradition. The Great Hall is a logistics hub for feeding a small army. The moving staircases are inefficient security theatre. The houses are not families but factions, pre-sorted voting blocks in a legislature that calls itself a school. In the Slytherin timeline of his own making, Hogwarts becomes exactly what the Alpine facility once tried to be: a training ground he will mine for leverage, not belonging. The pattern breaks in a corridor. Turning a corner, he almost collides with a pale blonde young man flanked by hulking shadows. Draco Malfoy has rehearsed this moment for years, in mirrors and in dreams, imagining camaraderie, rivalry, or righteous condemnation. What he finds is a stranger whose gaze slides over the Malfoy crest with clinical disinterest before moving on, as if evaluating a minor data point. Later, at the welcoming feast he was never meant to attend, Harry's eyes lift once, briefly, to the Gryffindor table. Hermione Granger, older, sharper, already carrying the fatigue of fighting a war without its central piece, meets his gaze. Two lives that should have been braided since childhood lock for a single, stunned second. Both understand without words that the world has been quietly re-engineered in their absence, and that Hogwarts is about to become the battlefield where that error is corrected. Old names, new dynamics. Ron, Hermione, and Draco meet the refuser. Hermione moves first. In the quiet war room Hogwarts has become in this timeline, she crosses the distance between them with the measured tread of someone who has argued with ministers and outstared unspeakables, but never rehearsed the script for confronting a legend who chose absence. Her robes are ministry cut, her wand hand steady, her eyes cataloguing, posture the way Harry stands like a man who has turned his back on an entire world and survived the cost. She introduces herself as Hermione Granger, Deputy Head of the Muggle Integration Office, the irony of the title hanging between them like a ward. She does not waste time on awe, she treats him as a problem statement. Why did you refuse? How did the letters fail? What gave you the will to treat an entire civilization as optional? Underneath the interrogation lies something sharper, moral urgency, almost accusation. Children died while you were building spreadsheets and taking commuter trains. You were a variable the war calculated as missing. Yet even as she presses, the academic in her is already dissecting the system that made his refusal possible. The trace, the guardianship laws, Dumbledore's curiously restrained interventions. Each is a fracture point. If a boy with Harry's soul resonance can disappear into the cracks, then the structure itself is a masterpiece of negligence. Her anger keeps circling back not just to him, but to the fortress of bureaucracy that let their greatest weapon simply walk away. Ron arrives with less ceremony and more gravity. In this version of the Slytherin timeline without its Slytherin, he has been an Auror, then not. A veteran of raids where the boy who lived existed only as a bitter joke told over body bags. He looks at Harry and sees two incompatible truths: the mate he might have had and the man who was not there when Fred died in a corridor lit green. His words are blunt, the way only someone raised in a cramped kitchen and a large family can be. You could have helped. You didn't. Was it cowardice or luxury? Beneath the resentment, though, lies something uglier: envy. Harry's normal childhood, his Muggle anonymity, his ability to choose boredom over trauma, all of it is a provocation. Ron has been conscripted by prophecy and poverty since birth. Meeting someone who slipped the net feels like an insult from the universe itself. Draco's entrance is quieter, but the resonance is darker. Raised on stories of Potter as existential threat and necessary scapegoat, he has built an identity around a rival who never arrived. Now, faced with a man who is neither golden boy nor convenient enemy, Draco's pure-blood poise fractures into wary curiosity. Here is someone who rejected his assigned role as completely as Draco has spent years trying to escape his own. Their conversation is almost clinically polite, edged with dry wit and unspoken recognition. Both are sons of narratives they declined to perform. Draco, weaponized by ideology. Harry, a weapon being polished in the dark by neglect rather than Bellatrix. There is a grim symmetry in that. Through each encounter, the same question keeps circling the table with methodical certainty. What does Harry owe them? Friendship, simply because their names share a prophecy? Leadership, because his scar photographs well in newspapers? Sacrifice, because he survived what others did not? Harry's answers are precise and tactically lethal. He owes them honesty, perhaps cooperation, but not his life on command. The argument should fracture here. Instead, it bends. When word comes of Voldemort's latest advance, Muggle infrastructure collapsing, wards failing in concentric rings around London, they all see the same pattern. This war has outgrown any single narrative. Hermione's strategies, Ron's field instincts, Draco's aristocratic intelligence networks, Harry's stubborn refusal to be owned by prophecy, separately insufficient. Together, an unnerving new equation. For one suspended moment, they stand in uneasy alignment. 4 gravitational centers, sharing a single map. None of them understands yet how violently Harry's late entry will torque the timeline. But the next move Voldemort makes will. And it is already in motion. The new chessboard. Strategy in a world without childhood bonds. The war that follows is not the war anyone prepared for. In canon, by the time Voldemort moves openly, the resistance is already half built in school corridors and cramped common rooms. The order reinforced by the DA, friendships annealed in troll attacks, basilisk hunts, and midnight detentions. In this timeline, that lattice never forms. Hogwarts has no boy who lived threading Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw into a single defiant network. What rises instead is a patchwork quilt of grudges, private oaths, and half-trusted alliances. The Order of the Phoenix still exists, but its internal cohesion is thinner. Without years of watching Harry risk himself for their children, the Weasleys are loyal to Dumbledore, not devoted. The DA never coheres into a paramilitary youth wing. At best, there are scattered dueling circles and study groups, brave but tactically isolated. When Harry finally steps onto the board as an adult, he does not inherit a ready-made army. He walks into a crowded room where everyone already has a side, a scar, and an agenda. He treats it exactly as Bellatrix trained him to, as a new chessboard, not a homecoming. Faces that once carried the warmth of shared dormitories are, to him, dossiers in motion. He evaluates McGonagall not as a beloved mentor, but as a battlefield commander with limited resources. He weighs Kingsley's reliability against his political exposure. He looks at the Weasleys and sees a vulnerable logistics hub, not surrogate parents. It is brutally efficient. It is also quietly catastrophic, because in stripping away sentiment, he underestimates the one currency that once made the resistance tactically lethal: emotional loyalty. In the Slytherin timeline, Neville did not follow Harry because of a recruitment speech. He followed because a boy who shared his humiliations stood up first. Here, that soul resonance never existed. When Harry asks for risks, he is a stranger with power, not a friend with shared history. People obey. Fewer volunteer. Voldemort adjusts with the same cold clarity. Without a famous schoolboy thwarting him year after year, the Dark Lord's fixation never crystallizes into personal obsession. Harry's late emergence is processed as a variable, not a nemesis, a weapon being polished in the dark by unknown hands. The response is pragmatic: probes, offers, attempted recruitment framed as shared disdain for ministry incompetence, and when that fails, surgical attempts at neutralization. No graveyard theatrics, no monologues, just war. Pattern interrupt. There is no prophecy pedestal shattering in the Department of Mysteries, no climactic DA charge. Instead, there are negotiation tables. Without shared jokes about trolls or whispered memories of the Philosopher's Stone, no one can lean on nostalgia to hold Harry in place. When Dumbledore withholds, when the Ministry lies, when the Order presumes, he can simply stand, turn, and leave the fortress of their war rooms behind. They feel the loss. He feels only the air clear. The conflict that unfolds is less a destined duel and more a high-stakes, multi-front negotiation between competing theories of authority. Voldemort offers naked dominance. The Ministry offers decaying bureaucracy. The Order offers moral duty without guarantees. Harry, raised to see the world as a masterpiece to be molded, gropes toward a third path: power without fealty, intervention without belonging. They think this makes him safer, more reasonable. They are wrong, because an opponent who does not believe he belongs to any side can walk away from every bargain, including the one where he agrees not to remake the world on his own terms. The private audience, Harry versus Dumbledore, Round 2. The private audience does not begin with shouting or prophecy. It begins with silence and a museum of other people's decisions. Dumbledore's office, rebuilt after the war he fought without his designated weapon, has become an archive of a timeline that tried to proceed without Harry Potter. Shelves of delicate, whirring instruments, track wards, bloodlines, and distant magical disturbances. Many are cracked, repaired, or quietly dead, casualties of a conflict that burned through resources faster than replacements could be crafted. The pensieve rests on a side table, heavy with silvery threads, from battles where a different child stood in Harry's place and died. Portraits of former headmasters watch a young man who was supposed to be legend and instead chose anonymity. In this timeline, the boy who lived walks into that office not as a student summoned to be managed, but as an external power being briefed. His movements are economical, almost Muggle in their lack of theatricality, yet every step carries the resonance of someone who has rehearsed this confrontation alone in a small, rented flat, far from any alpine fortress or ancestral hall. The wand at his side is not a badge, it is equipment. Dumbledore, out of habit or fear, makes his first mistake before either of them speaks. A gentle brush outward, the soft pressure of legilimency, the same reflexive probe he once used on frightened first years and repentant Death Eaters. It meets a wall, not a violent backlash, not Bellatrix's jagged, laughing occlumency, but layered glass. Years of compartmentalization, Muggle therapy vocabulary welded to clandestine magical training, a mind arranged by methodical certainty. The old man's probe slides off with almost clinical neatness. Harry's eyes do not harden. That would be a tell. They cool. "Please don't do that again," he says, tone courteous, almost bored. "If we're going to talk, we can talk. You don't get the inside track by default. It is a rebuff, but it is also a thesis statement. Whatever Harry is now, he is no longer a masterpiece to be molded. Only then does he lay out his terms, not as a plea, but as contract language. He will fight Voldemort because allowing a magical warlord to consolidate power threatens the only world he has ever actually lived in. Motorways, council estates, overworked social workers, a foster sibling who texts him about rent. He will lend his magic to prevent that world from being collateral damage in a conflict it never consented to. But he will not be a symbol, will not sit for photographs, will not headline recruitment drives for an institution that left him in a cupboard and then in deliberate ignorance. He will not die on schedule. The pattern breaks when Dumbledore, groping for some bridge, gestures to a small framed photograph half buried on a shelf. James and Lily laughing in a garden, Lily's hair a flare of red against the dark greenery, baby Harry reaching for the lens with unfocused delight. For a fractional second, the compartments misalign. The man who built his life around ignoring this world meets the proof that it once wanted him, however briefly, and his expression fractures just enough. Grief is not loud here. It is the tiny intake of breath when a life he never got to live stares back at him. Dumbledore sees it. The temptation to press, to weaponize that soul resonance of family, flickers and dies in his eyes. His era of orchestrating events through half-truths and emotional leverage is over, and he knows it. Harry, in turn, sees the exhaustion in the set of the old man's shoulders, the way his hand rests on the pensive, as if on a grave. Some of those choices were monstrous. Some were made from genuine, if catastrophically flawed, care. The recognition is mutual and wary. They leave the office not as general and weapon, but as uneasy co-conspirators, not trust. A ceasefire, with Voldemort's next move already forcing their hand. Endgame without a chosen one. Possible futures of a refusal. Voldemort moves first. In the silence after that office ceasefire, raids intensify, Muggle disappearances spike, and the war stops pretending to be anything but total. The wizarding world assumes that, eventually, the boy who lived will be dragged onto the board and the prophecy will snap back into place. They are wrong. In this timeline, Harry has spent 2 decades refusing to be a narrative device, and that refusal reshapes the endgame. One path begins the night. A Death Eater squad finally miscalculates and crosses into his carefully ordinary life. An untrained burst of power, a shattered street lamp, a masked body crumpled against brick. The trace, long quiet, screams to the Ministry. When they arrive, they do not find a frightened child, but an adult who has watched the war on the news, connected the disappearances, and realized that his freak accidents have always aligned with dark surges in the other world. The confrontation that follows is not a sorting hat moment. It is a negotiation. Harry agrees to enter the war only on his terms. No school, no pageantry, no chosen one rhetoric. He demands files, not fan mail. His adult perspective, free of school-era grudges and house tribalism, lets him see what neither Dumbledore nor the Ministry could, that the real battlefield is systemic. He turns his tiny Muggle flat into a fortress of maps and case files, cross-referencing oral reports with Muggle police data, tracing supply lines, money, and blood. Where Voldemort thinks in symbols and terror, Harry thinks in infrastructure. The victories are tactically lethal, but rarely cinematic. He exposes imperio-used officials with Muggle forensics, weaponizes the trace against Death Eater safe houses, and forces the Wizengamot to codify protections for Muggle-borns as a condition of his cooperation. When Voldemort finally falls, it is not in a single duel, but in a cascade failure of allies, vaults, and havens. A war ended by methodical certainty rather than myth. The Slytherin timeline had a weapon being polished in the dark. Here, the weapon is reluctant, improvised, but no less decisive. Another future is darker. The delay costs years, and with them, lives that no victory can retroactively reclaim. Whole families vanish. Hogwarts, deprived of its symbolic savior, becomes a battered institution rather than a beacon. Even if Harry's late intervention topples Voldemort, the world that survives is fragmented, traumatized, and painfully aware that no prophecy arrived in time to save their dead. In that world, Harry walks away when the killing stops. He refuses Order membership, declines Ministry posts, and retreats into Muggle anonymity, unwilling to be absorbed by a society that only ever wanted him as a weapon. There is, however, a quieter possibility that his refusal forces everyone else to grow up. Without a child hero to rally around, parents, teachers, and bureaucrats can no longer outsource their courage to a legend. McGonagall pushes for curriculum reforms, that teach political literacy instead of Quidditch lore. Kingsley organizes resistance cells without waiting for a teenage general. Even the Department of Mysteries is pressured to explain why it warehouses prophecies instead of dismantling the conditions that make them self-fulfilling. The culture of relying on the boy who lived as a narrative crutch begins to erode, replaced unevenly, imperfectly, by institutions that understand they must be their own shield. Across all these branches, the personal cost to Harry is non-negotiable. Whether he fights or walks away, he carries a double-edged knowledge that ignoring magic for years protected his psyche and simultaneously allowed others to suffer. There is no neat moral arithmetic that makes that bearable. At best, there is a kind of soul resonance between survivor's guilt and justified self-preservation, a dissonant chord he will hear in every quiet room for the rest of his life, which leaves us with a final, unsettling question that reaches beyond this timeline. Is it ever fair to expect one person to save a world that failed them first? And what does it say about us that we keep writing worlds that demand it? Because in the next turn of this analysis, we are going to follow that expectation to its logical extreme and watch what happens when a boy who might have walked away instead chooses to rule. Would you say no to magic, turning the thought experiment on you? And now the lens turns. Because for all the grand architecture of this alternate history, the 11-year-old refusal on that cramped suburban doorstep, the Hogwarts years unfolding in a hollow silence, the Second Wizarding War escalating without its poster boy, the adult Harry dragged back from his hard-won anonymity, and the endgame redefined around negotiation rather than martyrdom. Its sharpest edge is not aimed at Dumbledore, or Voldemort, or prophecy. It is aimed at you. In this timeline, Harry's first and most radical spell is a monosyllable. No, not a curse, not a shield, but a refusal to let a world that abandoned him at 1 year old claim him at 11. The letters pile up. Hagrid leaves without his famous recruit. The trace never bites, because the boy never casts. The castle waits, and its corridors remain haunted by an absence that no sorting hat can correct. The war moves on without its symbol, and destiny, deprived of a willing hero, learns how to stumble. So the question circles back with methodical certainty. If you discovered that you were secretly magical, would you drop everything to cross that threshold? Or would you defend the fragile fortress of the life you built without it? Especially if that other world had already proven it could leave you in a cupboard and call it protection. When the letter arrives, is it salvation? Or is it a recall notice from an authority that forfeited its claim years ago? The Slytherin timeline has always been about agency under pressure, and in this quieter divergence, the same theme persists. Stripped of alpine estates and overt grooming, what do we owe to communities that neglected us until we became useful again? How much authorship should any chosen one have over their own narrative arc, once the words are already etched in prophecy? Is destiny a binding contract, or merely an offer you are allowed, however inconveniently, to decline? They are wrong, the ones who insist that saying no to a calling is cowardice by definition. Because once you accept that refusal is on the table, The speculation changes texture. Should Harry have gone at 11, trusting the promise of wonder over the memory of neglect? Or was his refusal an act of psychological self-defense that the wizarding world had earned? In this timeline, does Voldemort ultimately win without his mirrored opposite, or does the absence of a neat prophecy-shaped solution finally force Dumbledore, the Ministry, and even the Death Eaters to become marginally more responsible, less dependent on a child weapon being polished in the dark? This is where you step in. In the comments, map your own refuser scenarios. The Muggle-born who tears up their letter, the squib who is secretly magical but chooses never to register, the adult who learns at 30 that they could have gone to Hogwarts and decides the window has closed. Tell me whether your Harry should have walked away forever, or whether the price of power is the surrender of a normal life. And if you want to keep tracing these fractures in fate, there are more what-if analyses in this Harry Potter series waiting for you. Alternate wars, alternate alliances, alternate gods in school robes, because in a world built on chosen ones, the most dangerous magic might be the word no.